Chapter 1. Applause before the blood. The first week of January in New York is when everybody pretends the calendar has scrubbed them clean. Men who have been cheating on their taxes for 11 months begin saying "fresh start" as if the phrase were a disinfectant. Women who have been practicing grudges like piano scales begin smiling again because smiles are easier than explanations and cheaper than therapy. Even the city itself looks as if it has been rinsed. The slush gets pushed to the curb, the air turns sharp, and the buildings stand there with their shoulders squared, as if they never sweat in August. That was the week a hotel ballroom filled up with polite laughter and strategic handshakes. And I mean strategic, the way generals mean it, not the way a man means it when he claims he just happened to run into a client. It was a civic fundraiser, which is the kind of event where you can raise money for playground equipment while also raising someone's blood pressure and lowering someone else's reputation. The tables had white cloths that looked as if they had never met gravy. The waiters moved like dancers who had been trained to avoid eye contact. The band played songs you recognized but could not name, which is the safest kind of music for people who want to talk while they pretend to listen. I was there because my job often requires being in rooms where other people are wearing their public faces. Besides, a hotel ballroom is one of the few places in Manhattan where you can watch a lie get applauded, without anyone feeling the need to whisper. The headline moment belonged to Grant Alder, a rising community board leader. He was the sort of man who could be described as young, even though he was close to 40, because in civic life anyone who has not yet made a public enemy is considered a rising star. He had a jaw that suggested he practiced his expressions in the mirror, and he had that clear, smooth voice that makes even ordinary statements sound as if they have been vetted by committee. He stood at the lectern, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the room in a way that suggested he knew exactly where the cameras were and approved of them. "This year," he said, "every donation will be transparent." It was a neat sentence, short enough to quote and clean enough to frame. It was also a sentence that could be used as a weapon if you knew how to aim it. The room applauded harder than the promise deserved. I do not mean a little extra clapping because people were in a good mood and their drinks were paid for. I mean they hit it like they were trying to convince themselves. The sound came up fast and full like a wave. Some of them smiled too quickly. Some of them laughed, as if the vow were a joke that relieved them. A few people clapped in a careful, measured way. The way you clap for a speaker, you want to appear to support, but do not trust enough to risk enthusiasm. And there was one cluster of applause that started before the rest. That is what I noticed. I am not claiming it was genius. It was the kind of detail you catch when you spend your life in Wolfe's orbit. Wolfe teaches you, mostly by scolding, that crowds are not a single thing. They are a set of individual intentions moving together by habit. If you want to understand the room, you do not listen to the speech. You listen to the reaction. The first claps came from a table on the left side of the room near the aisle. Not the closest table to the lectern, but the table placed in a position where attention could be seen. The sort of table that costs more because it purchases visibility. At that table were 4 people I recognized in the way you recognize names on signs, even if you never go into the building. Civic types, board types, donor types, the kind of people who keep business cards in silver cases and believe community is a word you can invest in. I leaned toward the man beside me, a lawyer I had met twice and disliked both times, and said softly, "Who are they?" He gave me a quick glance as if deciding whether my curiosity was harmless. Then he shrugged. "That's the Alder table. His people, Mia Cross, runs cross-community outreach. Philip Brandt, donor and contractor. Dana Kester, fundraiser consultant. And Miles Rourke, donor coordinator, handles the donor side. Leo Varen's the accountant. He does their books." He said it as if listing ingredients in soup. I repeated the names silently. Mia Cross, Philip Brandt, Dana Kester, Miles Rourke. Leo Varen. When the applause reached full noise, those 4 were already clapping in a rhythm that suggested coordination, not excitement. Mia Cross clapped with her elbows tucked in, smiling widely. Philip Brandt clapped with his hands high, almost theatrical. Dana Kester clapped lightly but fast. eyes darting toward the rest of the room as if measuring whether the applause was catching. Miles Rourke clapped first, just a beat too early. Then the others joined in. His hands met once, twice, and the rest followed, as if he had tapped a glass to signal a toast. He did it the way a man taps a glass to signal a toast. That made me suspicious. People who initiate applause are either generous or invested. In that room, generosity was scarce. When the event ended, the crowd broke into smaller currents, each current moving toward a purpose. Men with donors moved toward exits. Donors moved toward the bar. People who wanted to be photographed found the photographer. People who wanted to be remembered found Grant Alder. I watched him for another minute. He looked pleased, but not surprised. That was the second thing I noticed. A man who makes a spontaneous vow usually looks either proud of himself or nervous about the consequences. Grant Alder looked as if the vow had been scheduled, like dessert. Then I left because I had no interest in being trapped in a hotel lobby with civic types, congratulating each other on virtue. I went back to the brownstone on West 35th Street, where Fritz's dinner was waiting, and Wolfe's chair was waiting, and the orchids were waiting upstairs in their private climate, undisturbed by the city's annual resolutions. Wolfe was in the office when I came in, a book open on his desk, a beer near his right hand, and his expression set in its usual blend of impatience and control. Fritz had brought him a tray already, because Fritz believes in feeding Wolfe the way a priest believes in candles. "How was your excursion?" Wolfe asked without looking up. "It was civic," I said. No one confessed to anything. Everyone congratulated everyone. Grant Alder promised transparency. Wolfe's eyes lifted to me, mild interest showing because transparency is a word Wolfe distrusts. Wolfe prefers opacity because it makes truth more valuable. "A promise," Wolfe said, "in a ballroom." "Public vow," I said. "Every donation will be transparent." The room applauded like he had promised to end winter. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Applause is a symptom. It indicates desire, relief, fear, or stupidity. Which was it? "Yes," I said. Wolfe gave me a look that suggested he would have enjoyed cancelling my berth. I went on. The applause started from his table first. A little cluster. Leo Varin started it, then Mia Cross, Philip Brandt, Dana Kester joined in. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "You noted who clapped first." "You trained me," I said. "I trained you to observe," Wolfe corrected. "I trained you to resist sarcasm, with limited success." I grinned. Wolfe leaned back slightly. "Grant Alder, community board leader, vow of transparency, a useful phrase for a man building a public career." "It was also announced like it was planned," I said. He didn't look surprised by his own courage. Wolfe regarded me, then nodded once. "A vow announced as if scheduled suggests preparation. Preparation suggests motive." Before I could reply, the telephone rang. I answered, because that is my job, and Wolfe's is sulking at intrusion until it becomes interesting. "Goodwin," I said. Inspector Cramer's voice came on, and it had that tone that means he is irritated but also slightly uneasy, which is the worst combination for him. "Where's Wolfe?" "Breathing," I said. "What's wrong?" "Alder," Cramer said. "Grant Alder, found dead in his townhouse study before dawn. No sign of forced entry, neat room, private death." I looked at Wolfe. He had already stiffened slightly, not from grief, but from a pattern forming. Cramer continued. "He made some big vow last night at a fundraiser. Right, now he's dead. Everybody is pointing fingers and everybody is respectable, which means they're lying. I need Wolfe." Wolfe's voice carried from his chair. "Inspector, if you are at my telephone, speak." Cramer exhaled hard. "Nero, a public vow and a private death." Timing feels staged. I don't like staged. It makes me work. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Describe the circumstances briefly." Cramer did. He said the townhouse study was tidy, the body positioned oddly in the chair, no broken lock, no forced entry. Time of death estimated between 2 and 4. The servants had discovered him at 6. The wife was in hysterics. The police were in motion. Wolfe listened without moving. When Cramer finished, Wolfe said, "What was the cause of death?" "Single blunt strike," Cramer said. "Quiet, clean." Wolfe's eyes sharpened slightly. "And you called me because you dislike neatness." "I called because everybody there knows everybody," Cramer snapped, "and because your boy Goodwin was at that fundraiser." Wolfe's gaze moved to me. "Archie, who was in the room when the vow was made?" "I can give you names," I said. "And I can give you who clapped first." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Good. List them." Cramer muttered something about coming over, then hung up. Wolfe sat still for a moment, then said quietly, "A vow of transparency is not a vow unless it threatens something." I said, "Or someone." Wolfe nodded once. "Motives age faster than words, especially words that attract applause." He looked at me, and his eyes were cold and attentive. "A promise made too early is often made for the wrong reason." Outside, the city kept doing what it always does after midnight violence. It went on pretending its schedule mattered more than death. Inside, in Wolfe's office, the applause from the ballroom had already changed its meaning. Chapter 2, who planned for the applause when a man gets killed after making a public vow. Everyone claims the vow mattered, and no one admits they cared about it until it became useful. That is one of the city's smaller hypocrisies. And New York collects hypocrisies the way a harbor collects debris. Inspector Cramer had arranged to review the fundraiser footage, because in modern life even virtue leaves a recording. The hotel had cameras everywhere, pointed at everything, and if you pay enough for a ballroom, you also pay for a complete visual history of your own posturing. We met in a small conference room at the precinct that smelled of old coffee and new annoyance. A uniformed officer set up the screen while Cramer stood with his arms crossed, chewing his impatience. He had dragged me in because Wolfe had refused to come, which is Wolfe's way of being cooperative. When Wolfe refuses to leave the brownstone, it means he intends to make the world come to him in pieces. Cramer looked at me and said, "Your boss thinks applause is a clue." "My boss thinks everything is a clue," I said. "He just prefers clues that sit still." Cramer made a sound. "If this turns into a lecture about human nature, I'm walking out." "You can't," I told him. "It's your precinct." The screen flickered, then showed the ballroom. It looked even more polished on video, because cameras love shine. People moved like chess pieces. Smiles rose and fell on cue. Grant Alder stood at the lectern in his tailored suit, looking like a man who had practiced saying the right thing until his tongue could do it without involving his conscience. The sound was tinny, but the words were clear enough. He delivered the vow. "This year, every donation will be transparent." The applause came up fast, loud and neat, and the pattern that had pricked my attention the night before now stood out in bright lines. There was a fraction of a second, a small gap that meant nothing to a normal person and everything to a man like Wolfe. One set of hands began clapping before Grant finished the sentence. Not after the word transparent landed, not after the room recognized the cue, but before the vow completed itself. Cramer leaned closer. "Freeze that." The officer froze the frame. I pointed. "There, that table." We zoomed in, and the hands became identifiable. A man in a dark suit at a table near the aisle. His hands met once, twice, and then others followed as if he had fired a starting pistol. Cramer squinted. "Who is he?" "A donor coordinator," I said. "Miles Rourke." Cramer's eyes sharpened. "You know him." "I know of him," I said. "In those circles, donor coordinators are the people who know where the money comes from and where it is supposed to go. They are also the people who can make money appear clean." Cramer grunted. "Play it again." The footage rolled. As the applause began, the camera caught another detail. Janet Klein, the board chair, with a severe haircut and a face that looked as if it disapproved of weather, leaned toward Grant immediately after the vow. She whispered in his ear with a tight expression. Grant nodded once, but his smile did not shift. He kept facing the room like a man who refuses to let his mask slip even when the strap snaps. Cramer pointed. "Her, Janet Klein," I said. Cramer turned to the officer. Can we get audio? The officer shook his head. Too far. Ballroom noise. We can't isolate whispers. Cramer's mouth tightened. Damn. I watched the frozen frame a moment longer. Janet Klein's mouth was close to Grant's ear. Her face was not congratulating him. It was warning him. Cramer said, "Why would she whisper right then?" "Because she heard the vow differently than the donors did," I said. "A donor hears transparency and thinks publicity. A board member hears transparency and thinks liability." Cramer snorted. "Your boss is rubbing off on you." "That's a dangerous image," I said. We finished the footage, then moved to the practical part. Cramer wanted a suspect list. I wanted to carry a pattern back to Wolfe, who would treat it like a map. When I got to the brownstone, Fritz met me in the hall with a look that said the household had resumed its routine but was keeping one eye on the door. That is Fritz's way. He does not panic, but he notices. Wolfe was in the office. Of course, already seated, already in command. Already annoyed that the world insisted on misbehaving. He looked up when I entered, and his eyes demanded information without asking for it. I gave him the footage results. We saw it clearly. One man started clapping before Grant finished the sentence. Miles Rourke. He started the first wave. Also, Janet Klein leaned in and whispered to Grant immediately after the vow, her face tight. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. Excellent. The applause was planned by at least one person, and the whisper suggests immediate consequence. I nodded. Grant's aide, Lena Pierce, insists the vow was Grant's idea. She says it was added to his speech at the last moment. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Contradiction. Exactly, I said. Last-minute vows do not get early applause unless someone expected them. Wolfe regarded me with a look that suggested I had managed a complete sentence. Proceed with Lena Pierce, I said. I spoke briefly with her on the phone. She sounded shaken and professional, which is a common combination in aides. She claims Grant decided to add the vow late. She says he scribbled a note on his speech card just before he went on. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. A scribbled note would not produce coordinated applause. No, I agreed, unless the scribble was not spontaneous. Wolfe nodded once, or unless the vow was discussed beforehand, and the aide is lying to preserve an image. I added, Cramer says the murder weapon is likely a heavy object from the study, wiped clean, no forced entry, quiet death. Wolfe sat still. A heavy object from the study means familiarity. A man does not select an improvised weapon unless he is comfortable in the room. A killer who brings a weapon announces intent. A killer who uses what is at hand announces access, I said. So someone who belongs in the townhouse. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Or someone who could move through it without being challenged. Access can be social as well as physical. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. Archie, you will interview Miles Rourke, I said. I was hoping to spend the day watching the orchids grow. Wolfe's voice stayed even. You will interview him today. His early applause is either enthusiasm or instruction. Enthusiasm is rarely that punctual. I went out again because that is my job, and because New York in January does not care whether you are tired. Miles Rourke worked out of a small office attached to a community non-profit, the kind of place that survives on optimism and grant applications. The lobby smelled of copier toner and donated coffee. Rourke himself emerged from an office with a smile already in place, the smile of a man whose livelihood depends on appearing helpful. Archie Goodwin, I said. His smile flickered. It returned quickly. Ah, Wolfe's man. You clap fast, I said. He blinked, then laughed lightly. Clap fast. At the fundraiser, I said. You started clapping before Grant Alder finished his vow. His smile stiffened. I support honesty. I'm sure you do, I said, especially in other people. He kept the smile. Grant was doing the right thing. Then why did Janet Klein whisper to him as if his right thing had teeth? I asked. Rourke's eyes narrowed slightly. I don't know what Janet Klein thinks. You handle donors, I said. You handle money. You also handled special donor arrangements in December. His smile tightened. Everyone handles arrangements. It's the season. What kind of arrangements? I asked. He shook his head. Confidential. That word again, I said. Transparency and confidential in the same week. Grant Alder would have loved that irony. Rourke's face tightened. I can't discuss donor privacy. You can discuss whether those arrangements were legal, I said. His smile disappeared for a second. Then it returned. Thinner. Of course they were. Then define special, I said. He hesitated, then said, it means people give in ways that are not simple checks. Some give through foundations. Some give through pledged assets. Some give through paper that hides them. I said. His eyes hardened. It's not hiding. It's structure. Structure is hiding with good posture, I told him. Rourke's jaw tightened. Are you accusing me? I'm observing you, I said. You clapped early. You refuse to define special arrangements. You want transparency as long as it does not touch donors who prefer shadow. Rourke leaned back. Grant's vow was his idea. And yet you applauded as if you had been waiting for it, I said. He shrugged, too casual. Maybe I knew he would say it. How? I asked. He hesitated. We talked about messaging. A vow plays well. I nodded. So it was planned. He frowned. Planned is a harsh word. It is an accurate word, I said, and your applause was the cue. His eyes narrowed. Look, Grant wanted to reassure people. There were rumors about the money. He wanted to put it to rest. What rumors? I asked. Rourke's mouth tightened. I don't know. Yes, you do, I said. Donor coordinators always know. They are paid to know. He looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, some donors were worried about where funds were going. Grant said he would make things clean this year. And someone killed him before he could, I said. Rourke swallowed. I didn't kill him. I didn't ask, I said. I asked who would mistake the vow for a plan. He stared, then said, mistake it. I leaned forward slightly. If Grant's vow was bait, someone might have believed he already had evidence or was about to expose someone. They would act quickly. Rourke's face had gone pale. It was just a vow. That's what makes it dangerous, I said. When I left his office, I had enough to bring Wolfe. Miles Rourke had planned the applause because he knew the vow was coming, because he had been handling special donor arrangements, because donors were nervous, and because nervous donors can become ugly when threatened. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened. Eyes narrowed, beer untouched. When I finished, he sat still for a moment, then spoke. The vow was not brave, Wolfe said. It was bait, and someone mistook it for a plan. I nodded. So now we find who panicked. Wolfe's eyes were cold. Yes, the murderer is not always the one most threatened by exposure. Often it is the one most threatened by uncertainty. He looked at me. We will identify the people who needed the vow and the people who feared it, and we will not forget the whisper. Janet Klein whispered, because she knew exactly what transparency would touch. He sat back, and the case shifted from applause to blood, from ballroom shine to townhouse darkness, from public vow to private motive. Outside, the city kept applauding itself for starting a new year. Inside, Wolfe had already begun counting who clapped too early. Chapter 3, The Private Murder with Public Edges. Grant Alder's townhouse had the kind of front door that makes you stand up straighter before you ring the bell. It was painted the right shade of respectability and framed by stone that looked as if it had been scrubbed weekly by a man who loved rules. The snow on the steps had been cleared too neatly, as if even weather had been asked to behave. 2 uniformed men were posted outside, shifting in the cold, pretending not to be impressed by the neighborhood. The street itself was quiet in that way. Only an expensive street can be quiet, not because nothing happens, but because what happens is paid to be discreet. The only sound was a delivery truck somewhere at the corner, and the faint hiss of tires on wet slush. Cramer met me inside with his hat on and his coat unbuttoned, which for him counts as being relaxed. He was not relaxed. He was the color he gets when he has been forced to examine a crime that refuses to fit into a simple box labeled motive, means, opportunity, and slide easily into the file cabinet of his mind. "You're late," he said. "I was early," I told him. "You were impatient." He glared. "Wolfe isn't coming." "He never comes to townhouses," I said. "He regards them as vulgar displays of stair climbing." Cramer snorted and jerked his thumb toward the rear of the house. "The study's back there, take a look. And don't touch anything." "That's a rumor about me," I said, and followed him. The townhouse smelled warm and expensive. There was a faint scent of wood polish, old paper, and something floral that had been sprayed too lightly to feel obvious. That kind of scent is meant to suggest calm and control. It was failing. Grant Alder's study was on the ground floor at the back, facing a small enclosed garden that had become a white rectangle of snow. The room was handsome, in a way designed to look modest, while still being costly, shelves of books that were too evenly arranged. A desk that looked as if it had never suffered the insult of clutter. 2 chairs positioned to imply conversation. A lamp angled just so Grant Alder sat in his desk chair, dead, as if someone had told him to stop moving, and he had obeyed. His head was angled slightly to the side. His hands rested near the edge of the desk. There was no blood spatter, no overturned furniture, no broken lamp. If you did not look at his face, you could almost believe he was taking a disciplined nap, a private murder, tidy enough to offend me. The first thing I noticed was that the room was too neat, even for a man like Grant Alder. There is a difference between neatness as habit and neatness as staging. Habit leaves small sins, a pen slightly out of line, a paperclip left behind, a coffee ring that someone meant to clean later. Staging wipes those sins away and replaces them with a sterile feeling, like a museum exhibit. Cramer watched me scan the room. "You see anything?" "I see effort," I said. He grunted. "Good. That's what I see too." I approached the desk without crossing the invisible line my conscience draws around corpses. The desk surface was bare except for a pen set, a small tray, and a laptop open and facing Grant's chair. The laptop screen showed a document title, Transparency Rollout. Under the title was nothing. No text, no bullet points, no draft language, just empty white space, like someone had opened the file and then erased it with care. "You got tech on this?" I asked. Cramer nodded. "They're on their way, but the file's empty." "Empty files are not empty," I said. "They're just ashamed." Cramer made a sound that meant he did not care for my poetry. I leaned slightly to look at the desk surface. "Where's the blotter?" Cramer blinked. "What?" "The desk blotter," I said. "A man like this would have one. Leather or felt. Something to protect the desk and look official." Cramer frowned, then looked. His eyes narrowed, and I saw the realization arrive. There's a mark, exactly. The wood beneath the center of the desk had a pale rectangle, slightly lighter than the rest, the kind of clean patch you get when something sits in one place for a long time, and then is removed. The desk had been exposed, briefly, and the difference in color had not yet faded. Cramer muttered, "Why would a killer take a blotter?" "Because paper hides under blotters," I said. "People kill for paper more than they kill for pride." Cramer looked at me as if that sentence had been mailed to him from Wolfe. "Wolfe said that." "He did," I admitted. "He's irritatingly right often enough to be dangerous." I moved my gaze lower, toward the space beneath the desk. That was where the room's cleanliness started to crack. Under the desk, near the right leg, a single cufflink lay on the rug. It was expensive, the kind of cufflink that tries not to look expensive by being understated. Silver, heavy, with a small, dark stone in the center. It was unfamiliar to me, which in a case like this means it belonged to someone who should not have been in the room, or someone who was in the room and did not expect to leave evidence behind. I pointed. "That." Cramer leaned down and looked. "We bagged it. Found it when we did the first sweep." "It doesn't belong to Grant," I said. Cramer's mouth tightened. "Number his cuffs are buttoned. No links on him." "So someone else dropped it," I said. A man with expensive taste or a man who wants to look like he has expensive taste? Cramer nodded grimly. It's being processed. I scanned again, letting my eyes do the slow work. They always do when Wolfe's voice is in my head. The shelves were too neat. The chair angles were too deliberate. The lamp was positioned too precisely. Then I noticed something else, and it made my stomach tighten. The balcony door. The study had a glass door leading out to the enclosed garden. It was shut. The curtains were drawn halfway. At a glance it looked secure. But Cramer's men had a way of checking doors that comes from being disappointed too often. They had tested it, and Cramer had already been annoyed about it, because he spoke before I could ask. Door was shut, he said, but it wasn't latched. You could pull it open if you tried. No sign of forced entry, no damage, just not latched. Or staging, Cramer said. Or habit, I said. Some people think a shut door is a locked door. Cramer's eyes narrowed. You're telling me the killer used the balcony door. I'm telling you it matters that it's not latched, I said, whether it's entry, exit, or misdirection. Cramer exhaled. The place is a nest of respectable liars. Grant made a vow about transparency, and now everyone in his orbit is acting like they're allergic to light. Light makes people reveal what they have been hiding, I said. That's why they call it exposure, Cramer grunted. You done here? Almost, I said. I turned my attention to what was missing. Missing things often matter more than present ones, because they are the only things someone cared enough to remove. Grant's phone was gone. That had already been noted, because modern homicide investigations treat phones like organs. If the phone is missing, it is as if the victim's memory has been stolen. Cramer confirmed it. Phone isn't here. His wife says he always keeps it on him. We checked the house. So whoever killed him took it, I said. Or someone took it after, Cramer said. I looked at him. After, you mean a wife or an aide? Cramer shrugged. I mean someone who didn't want us seeing messages. I nodded slowly. And the blotter? Cramer's jaw tightened. Yeah. The murder weapon was likely something heavy from the room. There were objects that could do it. A paperweight, a small bronze sculpture, even a hard-bound book if you had bad manners. But the weapon had been wiped clean, which meant the killer had stayed long enough to wipe it and had the composure to do so. No struggle. One strike. Quiet. Clean. I looked at Grant's face again. At the controlled angle of his head, he had been disciplined in life, and someone had granted him an orderly death, which is not mercy, it is confidence. I left the study and found the living area where people were gathering, the wife in a robe, with a pale face, a neighbor pretending to offer support, while watching for gossip, and a woman in a neat coat, who had the taut look of a person holding grief in one hand and procedure in the other. That was Lena Pierce, Grant's aide. She looked up when she saw me. Her eyes were red at the edges, but her posture was still professional. That told me she had been trained to keep her balance, even when the floor moved. Aides are often the only ones in a public man's life who know how much of him is performance. Mr. Goodwin, she said. You know me, I said. Everyone was, I said. In that room anyway. She swallowed. I don't know what you need from me. I need what Grant needed, I said. Truth. But we can settle for information. She flinched slightly at the word truth. It was not the flinch of guilt, more the flinch of someone who has seen truth used as a club. Grant was going to publish donor names, she said, before I even asked. That was interesting. People do not volunteer information like that unless they are scared it will be discovered anyway. Publish them where? I asked. In the annual report, online. He wanted a public transparency page. Names, amounts, categories, she said. He said the community deserved to know. And I prompted because I could feel there was more. And he was going to expose restricted gifts from December, she said, voice tightening. He used that phrase, restricted gifts, he said. Some donations had conditions that weren't proper. Conditions, I said. Like what? She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the hallway. He didn't tell me all of it, but he was worried. He said he had receipts that showed things were routed through the wrong channels. He requested archived donation receipts earlier this week. He told me to pull everything from last December. I nodded slowly. Who handled donors? Miles Rourke, she said immediately. But he's not a bad man. He's just careful. Careful, I said. That's a word. Donors love. She swallowed. Grant thought people were using restricted gifts to move influence. He thought someone was treating the board like a private machine. He wanted to stop it. And he added the vow last minute, I said, watching her face. Yes, she said quickly. It was his idea. He scribbled it on his card right before he went on. I felt the contradiction tighten in my mind because I could hear Wolfe's voice turning it over. Last, minute vows do not get first. Wave applause unless someone expected them. That expectation had to come from somewhere. Lina, I said, keeping my voice mild. Did Grant tell anyone beforehand he was going to say it? No, she said, too fast. I held her gaze. You are a good aide. You protect the narrative. But I'm not asking for a narrative. I'm asking for the truth. Her shoulders sagged slightly. He talked about it earlier in the day. He was angry, he said. He was tired of dancing around it. He told Janet Klein that he might say something tonight. There it is, I said. Her eyes widened. I didn't mean. Yes, you did, I said gently. You meant to protect him, but he's beyond protection now. She swallowed hard. Janet told him not to. She said it would cause trouble. She said some donors would be humiliated. Humiliated donors can be dangerous, I said. She nodded, eyes wet again. Grant didn't care. He said transparency was the point. And who clapped first? I asked. She frowned. Miles Rourke, I guess. He's always supportive in public. Supportive or managerial? I asked. Did Grant have his phone with him last night? Yes, she said. Always. He was checking messages. He got a call after we left the hotel. He looked upset. From who? I don't know, she said. He didn't tell me. He said he had to stop by the townhouse to pick up something from his study. Then he told me to go home. What time? I asked. She thought. Around midnight. And he was alive then, I said. Yes. I nodded, then stepped back, letting her breathe. Aides are not often killers, but they are often messengers, and messengers are often used. I went outside and called Wolfe from the sidewalk, where my breath showed in the cold. Wolfe answered. Archie, townhouse study is too neat, I said. A desk blotter is missing. There's a pale rectangle on the wood where it sat. Grant's laptop is open to a file titled Transparency Rollout, but it's empty. Phone is missing. One cufflink was found under the desk, expensive and unfamiliar. Balcony door was shut but not latched. Wolfe was silent for a moment, and I could picture his eyes narrowing. Continue. Lena Pierce says Grant planned to publish donor names and also expose restricted gifts from December, I said. He requested archived donation receipts earlier this week. Lena admits Grant mentioned the vow to Janet Klein earlier in the day. Janet told him not to say it. Grant got an upsetting call after leaving the hotel and went to his townhouse to pick up something from the study. Wolfe's voice was low. Good. The vow is now anchored. It was discussed beforehand. That explains the early applause and the tight whisper. The vow was the moment someone realized their secrets might become public. I agree, I said. Now what? Wolfe's voice sharpened slightly. You will obtain the list of archived receipts Grant requested. You will identify the cufflink, and you will determine the significance of the blotter. You think something was hidden under it, I said. I do not think, Wolfe replied. I infer. A blotter covers paper. A killer who takes a blotter is taking what it concealed or taking the surface that may bear impressions. I blinked. Impressions, right. The pressure marks from writing. Yes, Wolfe said. If Grant wrote notes on paper atop the blotter, the impression would remain. A man seeking to erase a record would remove the blotter. That was Wolfe in perfect form, making something as dull as a desk accessory feel like a witness with teeth. I'll work the receipts and the cufflink, I said. Also, Wolfe added, the balcony door. Entry or staging, I said. Precisely, Wolfe replied. In a private murder with public edges, the exit is often the public edge. Determine whether the door was used or merely displayed. He hung up because Wolfe believes the telephone is best used as a lever, not as a conversation. I stood a moment in the cold, looking up at the townhouse windows. A vow made in a ballroom had reached into this quiet room and ended in a single blunt strike. The neatness suggested confidence. The missing phone suggested fear. The missing blotter suggested someone knew exactly what to remove. And the cufflink under the desk suggested that even confident killers sometimes leave a small, expensive mistake behind. Back in the city, applause fades quickly. Evidence does not. Chapter 4. Motives that aged overnight. If you ever want proof that time does not heal, spend a night with people who have something to lose. Morning will find them older, not because the clock moved, but because fear does work while they sleep. Grant Alder had made a vow in a ballroom and died in a study, and in between those two events there had been a stretch of hours when people who smiled for cameras began making calls. They would rather not explain. Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids when I came in that morning, and Fritz met me in the hall with a note in his hand. Mr. Goodwin, Fritz said. Mr. Wolfe says you are to bring him what you learn, and he says your coffee will be ready in the kitchen if you prefer it before you speak. That was Fritz being Fritz, offering nourishment before punishment. I'll take both, I said, and went to the kitchen, swallowed coffee that tasted like sanity, then headed to the office. Wolfe was at his desk when I entered, the newspaper folded beside him. His beer untouched, his expression already impatient. He hates it when other people's disorder interrupts his schedule, and he hates it even more when the disorder is criminal, because then it is also stupid. Archie, he said. Morning, I replied. The city is still pretending it is innocent. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Proceed. I set my notebook on the desk and began, because Wolfe prefers information the way he prefers food, arranged and served without delay. Grant's vow triggered panic calls after the fundraiser. I said, real ones timestamps. Janet Klein phoned the charity's accountant at 11:12 p.m. and demanded the December ledger be reviewed tonight. Wolfe's eyes sharpened slightly. How do you know the time? Phone record, I said. The accountant's call log. I spoke to him in person. His name is Leo Varron. Wolfe nodded once. Recognizing the name from my first list. Continue. Miles Rourke visited the donor storage cabinet before midnight, I said. He told the night receptionist he needed program notes, but the cabinet is where donor files are kept. The hallway camera shows him leaving with a thin folder tucked under his coat. Wolfe sat still, the way he does when the pieces begin to click into place. Words do not kill, he said, but they move people into motion. Motion leaves timestamps. I've noticed, I said. The guilty are often very punctual when panicking. Wolfe ignored that. Grant's vow created fear. Fear creates activity. Activity reveals the guilty by their haste. I nodded. Also, the missing desk blotter. I spoke to a stationery supplier. Grant's wife confirmed he used a leather desk blotter, heavy, with a firm writing surface. Wolfe, you were right. If you write on a sheet of paper, the pressure marks can be traced on the blotter. Names, amounts, notes. The killer taking it suggests Grant wrote something that mattered. Wolfe's mouth tightened into something close to satisfaction. Yes, a blotter is a record keeper that does not know. It is keeping records, I said. Cramer recovered a torn page from Grant's trash. It's only half. It reads, "Do not publish," and the rest is ripped away. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. The rest likely contained a name, or several, I said, which would make it worth killing for. Wolfe's gaze held mine. Where is the accountant? Not here, I said, but Cramer has him on call. He is nervous, and he should be. Wolfe nodded once, then leaned back. The vow became a confession because it forced the guilty to reveal themselves by scrambling. That sentence sounded like Wolfe, and it sounded right. I had more. Wolfe, Janet Klein's call was not casual. She demanded the ledger be reviewed tonight. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Tonight. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Why? Because she feared Grant would act fast, I said. Or she feared someone else would. Wolfe's voice was quiet. She feared the vow would not remain words. She feared it would become action. I nodded, and Miles Rourke did not merely make a call. He went physically to the cabinet. He removed a folder. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. He removed evidence. Or he removed leverage, I said. Either way, it is paper again. Wolfe's mouth tightened. People kill for paper more than they kill for pride. Pride is a luxury. Paper is consequence. That was Wolfe, repeating his own principle because he enjoys being correct. The telephone rang. I answered. Cramer's voice was brisk. Goodwin, tell Wolfe I got the hallway footage you wanted. Rourke at 11:48 p.m., coming out of the donor file corridor with a thin folder under his coat. He didn't sign it out. He didn't log it. He just took it. I glanced at Wolfe. Wolfe had gone still in his chair. I'll tell him, I said, Cramer added. And we found the trash page you mentioned. Do not publish. And then torn. That's not the wife's handwriting. I'll tell him that too, I said. Cramer hung up. Wolfe said, Give me the exact time again. Rourke leaves with the folder at 11:48, I said. Janet calls the accountant at 11:12. Wolfe nodded slowly. So Janet's call precedes Miles's action. She may have triggered it. Or she may have been responding to the same stimulus, I said. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Grant Alder. Yes, I said. He made the vow. Then he became a threat. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. We must now reconstruct the night between vow and death. The guilty will have moved. Their movements will show purpose. I said, You want me to visit the charity office again? Wolfe's voice was firm. Yes, and you will speak to Leo Varin, the accountant, in person. Bring him here if possible. He will not enjoy it, but his comfort is not a priority. I sighed. When is anyone's comfort a priority? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Fritz's, the orchids, and mine. Proceed. So I proceeded. The charity office was in a midtown building that had the same look as many non-profit headquarters. Bright posters, sincere mission statements on walls, and a staff that moved as if guilt were always nearby. Because fundraising is a constant compromise with reality. The receptionist recognized me and looked as if she would have preferred a root canal. Miles is busy, she said immediately. I am not here for Miles, I replied. Not first. Leo Varin's office was small and neat. Like a man who believes cleanliness will protect him from scrutiny. He was older than the others, grey at the temples, wearing the expression of a man who has spent decades watching numbers and learning that numbers never forgive. When he saw me, his face tightened. Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Varin, I said. You got a call from Janet Klein at 11:12 last night. His eyes flicked down. Yes. Demanding the December ledger be reviewed tonight, I said. He swallowed. Yes. Why? I asked. He hesitated. She said Grant was planning to publish donor names. She said if he did it carelessly, people would react badly. You act badly, I said, or react legally. Varin's mouth tightened. There are restricted gifts. I leaned forward slightly. Define restricted. He hesitated. Restricted means donations earmarked for specific programs. I know what the dictionary says. I said, What do the books say? His eyes flicked toward the door. The books say some gifts came with unusual instructions. Instructions, I repeated. Varin nodded slowly. A donor would give, but only if the money was routed through a separate account first, or only if it was recorded under a different category, or only if certain expenses were covered. I said, That's not restriction, that's camouflage. Varin's face went pale. It's complicated. It's illegal, I said. He flinched. Not necessarily. It is if it hides the donor or the purpose, I said. Grant Alder promised transparency. That would expose the camouflage. That's why Janet called you at 11:12. Varin's voice was low. She wanted me to find a way to fix it. Fix it, I said, meaning to make it look clean. His eyes were wet now, but he held his voice steady. She said Grant would destroy the organization if he published raw donor data. Grant is dead, I said. The organization may still be destroyed. The difference is now there is a murder. Varin swallowed. I didn't kill him. I didn't ask, I said. I'm asking what you saw in the ledger. He hesitated, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin binder. He placed it on the desk with the care of a man handling dynamite. December, he said. There were entries that did not match receipts. There were donations that appeared twice under different names. There were transfers between accounts that were not properly documented. I nodded, and Grant asked for archived donation receipts earlier this week. Yes, Varin said. He said he wanted to cross-check. He was angry. He said someone was using the charity as a laundromat. Then someone decided to stop him, I said. Varin's shoulders sagged. Janet wanted me to meet her last night. I refused. I said it could wait until morning. She said it could not. And Miles Rourke visited the donor cabinet before midnight. I said. Varin's eyes widened. He did. You didn't know, I said. Interesting. Varin whispered. That cabinet has restricted files. It has donor agreements. It has correspondence. And Miles walked out with a thin folder, I said. Varin's voice shook. Those files are not supposed to leave without documentation. Then document this, I said. Come with me. Wolfe wants to hear your story. Varin stared at me as if I had suggested jumping off a bridge. Then he looked down at the binder again, and his shoulders sagged with resignation. Numbers do that to a man. They make him accept consequences because he can see them. All right, he said quietly. I'll go. When we returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting in his chair as if he had never moved, which he probably had not. He listened to Varin's account with cold attention, asking only occasional questions, each one precise enough to make Varin wince. When Varin finished, Wolfe sat silent for a moment, then spoke. Applause, Wolfe said, can be the sound of a plan being protected. Varin looked confused. I understood. Wolfe continued. Grant Alder's vow was not a sudden moral revelation. It was a move. It was either intended to force compliance or intended to frighten someone into action. The guilty responded with activity. Janet Klein called to manipulate the ledger. Miles Rourke removed a folder. These are not the actions of innocent people merely concerned with reputation. They are the actions of people attempting to remove leverage. Cramer arrived a few minutes later, breath sharp from the cold impatience sharp from being himself. Wolfe did not waste time on greetings. He laid out the timestamps like nails. Inspector, Wolfe said, your murderer revealed himself not by violence, but by haste. The vow moved people. People moved paper. Paper is the motive. Now we will identify which paper mattered enough to kill. Cramer grunted. So who? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Not yet. We must first obtain the folder. Miles Rourke removed, and we must identify the cufflink. One tells us what was taken. The other tells us who stood close enough to drop it. He looked at me. Archie. Yes. You will find the folder. That was Wolfe's version of a bedtime story. Chapter 5. The donor list that was never meant to live by the fifth day of a case. Wolfe begins to look offended when the world fails to confess. He sat behind his desk that morning with his beer untouched, and his eyes narrowed, as if the entire borough were an unruly servant who had forgotten to bring the tray. Archie, he said. The donor list was never meant to live. That was Wolfe's way of telling me to put on my coat. I went back to the charity office, because in a crime like this the scene of the murder is only the stage, and the real struggle happens where paper is filed. Grant Alder had been killed in a townhouse study, but he had been threatened in a ledger. The charity's suite was busier than it had been the day before. Staff moved with a slightly faster pace, as if someone had told them there was an emergency, but refused to name it. The receptionist looked at me with the tight smile of a person who has begun to regret working for good causes. "You again," she said. "I have a face that encourages repetition," I replied. "Where's the donor cabinet?" Her eyes narrowed. "That's restricted." "So was Grant Alder's life," I said. "It didn't help him." Before she could decide whether to call security or a priest, Leo Varon appeared from his office. He had the exhausted look of a man who had slept poorly and counted worse. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I'll take you back." The donor storage cabinet was in a narrow room off the main corridor, the kind of room that was meant to feel private, with a solid door and a lock that looked sturdier than it needed to be. Varon opened it with a key from his ring, his hand shaking slightly. Inside, metal filing cabinets sat like quiet guardians. Each drawer had a label: donor agreements, receipts, restricted gifts, December ledger. I went straight to the ledger. Varon pulled out a thick binder, the sort of thing that makes you grateful you do not have to carry morality in paper form. He placed it on the table, opened it, and waited, as if expecting the binder to accuse him out loud. I flipped through. The pages were neat, lined with entries in ink, dates, amounts, donor names, categories. Then I reached late December. The page texture changed. The originals had that slight unevenness you get with handwritten entries and quick corrections, faint pressure marks, little habits of the wrist. These pages were too smooth, too flat, too perfect. Clean photocopies, no original ink, no impressions, no small human flaws. I looked at Varon. "These aren't the originals." His face tightened. "Number? Where are they?" I asked. He swallowed. "They were replaced." "By whom?" I said. His gaze flicked toward the corridor. Janet Klein. There it was, neat as Wolfe likes it. A suspect who did not even bother to wait for daylight before scrambling. "When?" I asked. He hesitated. "Last night after the fundraiser." I stared. "You're telling me that within hours of Grant's vow, the ledger pages were removed and replaced with photocopies?" Varon's shoulders sagged. "She ordered me to tidy the records. She said it was temporary. She said she would return the originals once Grant calmed down." "Grant never calmed down," I said. Varon's voice shook. "I didn't think. I thought it was politics. I thought it was about donors being embarrassed." I leaned closer. "It was about donors being exposed." He nodded miserably. I flipped the photocopy pages again, looking for flaws. Photocopies can hide ink, but they cannot hide absence. There were missing lines where entries should have been. There were blank spaces where numbers should have been tight. Someone had not merely copied. Someone had edited. "Temporary," I said. "That word is a lie people use when they want you to cooperate before you understand." Varon whispered. "Yes." I moved to the donor cabinet drawers. I checked the lock on the cabinet door, not because I enjoy hardware, but because Wolfe had drilled that habit into me. Locks tell you about hands. The lock face had light scratches at the edge, small and shallow, the kind you get when a key is not quite right, a copied key that needed persuasion, not a burglary attempt, a quiet entry by someone who expected the door to open. I pointed. "That's new." Varon leaned in, frowning. "I didn't notice. You didn't want to," I said. I asked him, "Who has keys?" He swallowed. "Board members. Me, Miles Rourke, has access sometimes, for donor work." "Sometimes," I said, meaning when someone lets him. I opened the cabinet and pulled out a drawer labeled Restricted Gifts. Inside were folders with donor names, some with foundation names, some with corporate names, some with initials that were meant to look harmless. One folder slot was empty, a clean space in a row of crowded files. "What's missing?" I asked. Varon's eyes widened. That slot was for the Klein file. My stomach tightened. Janet Klein's family. He nodded. Harold Klein's foundation. Large donations restricted. Restricted how? I asked. He hesitated. They wanted certain contracts awarded. They wanted certain vendors. They wanted influence. I exhaled. So Grant's vow threatened not only donors, but the mechanism of influence. Varin looked pale. Yes. Where's Miles Rourke? I asked. Varin said, he is in a meeting. Bring him, I said. He hesitated. I leaned forward slightly. Varin, a man is dead. Don't make me start shouting. Varin left, and I used the minutes to do what Wolfe would call proper observation. I checked the cabinet drawer edges for smudges, looked for signs of hasty removal, checked the file labels for recent reattachment. When Miles Rourke arrived, his smile was already prepared, but it was frayed at the edges. Mr. Goodwin, he said, this is becoming disruptive. Grant Alder's skull was disrupted, I replied. Sit down. He did. His eyes flicked to the ledger binder. You're looking at the December ledger, I said. He nodded. Yes. You see these pages, I said, tapping the photocopies. They're replacements. Rourke's smile tightened. The accountant manages that. The accountant does what Janet Klein orders, I said. Rourke's eyes narrowed. Janet is the chair. She has authority. Authority doesn't authorize murder, I said. Now, did you open the donor cabinet last night? His smile returned. Too quick. Number, your fingerprints are on it, I said. His eyes widened slightly. I handle the cabinet in general. Not last night. Funny, I said. Because the lock is scratched like it was opened with a copied key, and someone removed the Klein file. Rourke's face went pale. I did not remove anything. I watched him carefully, because lies have a rhythm. His denial came fast, too clean like his applause. You said you never opened it, I said, but your prints are on the cabinet face near the lock, not on the drawer handles where you would normally touch it. That suggests you were working the lock. Rourke's jaw tightened. That's speculation. It's physics, I said. He leaned forward. Grant was going to publish donor names irresponsibly. It would have destroyed us. Grant was going to publish them transparently, I said. That word is what you clapped for. Rourke's eyes flashed. Transparency is fine when it's controlled. There, I said. That is the problem. He clenched his hands. I'm not the killer. I didn't say you were. I said. I said you lied. Lies age rapidly in January. Rourke swallowed. I didn't open it. I said. Then why did the camera show you leaving the donor corridor at 11:48 with a thin folder under your coat? His face froze. I continued gently. You can say you needed program notes, but program notes do not come from a restricted donor cabinet. They come from your desk. Rourke's voice was tight. I needed to protect the organization by removing evidence, I said. He shook his head. It was temporary. Everybody loves temporary, I said. It makes crime feel like paperwork. Rourke stared at me, then looked away. I had enough. Wolfe would want it all, especially the part where people used the same excuses. Back at the brownstone, I told Wolfe what I had found. The ledger pages replaced with photocopies, Varin's admission that Janet ordered the tidy work after the fundraiser, the scratched lock suggesting a copied key, the missing Klein file slot. Rourke's denial aging into panic. Wolfe listened, eyes narrowed, hands folded. When I finished, he said, thus, the circle tightens. That's one way to put it, I said. Wolfe's voice was quiet. Grant Alder was killed to retrieve the original ledger pages or the desk blotter impressions. The vow was the trigger, not the motive. It forced immediate activity, which reveals intent. The phone rang, I answered. Cramer's voice came through, brisk and satisfied in the way it gets, when he can finally attach a name to an object. Goodwin, the cufflink under the desk. We matched it. I glanced at Wolfe. To who? Cramer said. It's a set owned by Harold Klein. I felt the case shift. Janet Klein's husband. Exactly, Cramer said. Harold says he lost 1 month ago. Janet says she never saw it, but it's his custom piece. Jewelers confirmed it. I looked at Wolfe. Wolfe's eyes narrowed and his mouth tightened, not in surprise, but in confirmation. "Tell Cramer," Wolfe said softly, loud enough for the phone to pick up, "that he has just learned the vow did not expose strangers. It exposed family." Cramer heard it. There was a pause. Then he said, "Damn." Wolfe did not smile. He rarely does when family is involved, not from sentiment, but because family complicates logic with emotion, and Wolfe dislikes complications. When I hung up, Wolfe sat still for a moment, then spoke. "The donor list was never meant to live," he said. "It was meant to be managed, controlled, adjusted." Grant Alder's vow threatened to release it from management. "That is why the guilty acted instantly," I said. Janet Klein ordered the ledger tidied. Miles Rourke removed a folder, and Harold Klein's cufflink is under Grant's desk. Wolfe's eyes were cold. A family secret, protected by a public organization, managed by a donor coordinator, and threatened by a man who believed applause meant support. I leaned back. "So Janet Klein is up to her elbows." Wolfe's voice was calm. "Perhaps, but do not be impatient. A cufflink under a desk does not prove murder. It proves presence. Presence must be explained." "And the blotter?" I said. Wolfe nodded. "Yes, the blotter is the true missing witness. We will find it, or we will find the impressions elsewhere. Archie, you will locate the blotter." I sighed. "Of course I will." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Do not sigh. It is undignified." "Then I'll suffer quietly," I said. Wolfe's voice was quiet, almost reflective. "The promise did not expose strangers. It exposed family. That is why the applause was so eager. It was the sound of a plan being protected until it became the sound of panic." Outside, January sat on the city like a paperweight. And, somewhere, in someone's possession, the donor list that was never meant to live was either hidden, destroyed, or waiting to be used as leverage. Wolfe intended to make it speak. Chapter 6. The applause leader panics. Wolfe does not enjoy chasing people. He enjoys positioning them so they chase themselves. It is more efficient, and it keeps him in his chair, which is where he believes a mind does its best work. When he told me that morning to spread a rumor, he said it as if he were instructing me to carry a tray. "Archie," he said, "the truth is slow. Fear is fast. We will borrow fear." I had just come in from the street with my ears cold and my patience thinner than Fritz's toast, and I was still thinking about donor ledgers and missing blotters and the cufflink that had turned a respectable scandal into a family problem. Wolfe sat at his desk with the calm expression of a man who had already decided how the day would end. "You want me to spread a rumor," I said. "I want you to plant a controlled stimulus," Wolfe replied. "Rumor is a crude word. It's also the word the city understands," I said. "What's the stimulus?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Grant Alder mailed copies of the original donor ledger to a journalist. That will do." I blinked. He didn't. Wolfe looked offended. "Of course he did not. If he had, we would be reading it in the morning papers." "You will say he did." "The guilty will respond as if he did, because they cannot afford to assume otherwise." That was Wolfe's talent. He took a lie and used it to expose other lies, and he did it with the same tone he used to complain about Fritz's choice of mustard. "Who do I tell?" I asked. Wolfe's voice was calm. "Tell it where it will spread but cannot be traced to you. You are capable of that." "I'm flattered," I said. Wolfe ignored me. "The journalist should be named vaguely. Not a specific person. A journalist, a reporter. Someone who likes donor scandals. Allow the guilty to imagine the worst. They will." I nodded. "And you think Janet Klein will flare up?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed further. "Janet Klein is a woman who mistakes control for virtue. She will not tolerate uncertainty." "And Miles Rourke," I said. Wolfe's mouth tightened. "Miles Rourke is a man who mistakes applause for authority. He will panic when he thinks the audience has changed." I went out because Wolfe had chosen his method, and I was the method's legs. The trick with a rumor is to place it in the right mouth. If you tell it to a man who loves attention, he will turn it into a parade. If you tell it to a woman who loves secrecy, she will turn it into a knife. I needed it to travel quickly through the charity's small world, without arriving at the police, as something Goodwin said. That meant it had to travel through people who talk too much for their own good. I chose a mid-level staffer at the charity who had already demonstrated the right qualities: nervousness, self-importance, and a deep affection for private information. I called her from a public phone because Wolfe would have scowled if I used the brownstone line. I said, "I heard something you should know." She inhaled like a person presented with cake. "What?" "Grant Alder," I said. Before he died, he mailed copies of the original donor ledger to a journalist. He was tired of waiting. He sent it out. There was a sharp intake of breath, then a whisper. "Who told you that?" "Someone who saw him mailing an envelope," I said. "That's all I can say. Don't repeat it." Silence. Then a quick, guilty, "Of course not." I hung up. If you want to measure how fast a rumor can move, you should watch a room full of people who fear consequences. It moved like a match in dry paper. By the time I reached the charity office, the air had changed. Staff were speaking in low voices. The receptionist's face was pale. Phones were ringing and not being answered. The kind of controlled panic that tries to pretend it is still professional. Leo Varin looked as if he had aged a year since the day before. When he saw me, he did not even greet me properly. "It's true," he said. "What?" I asked, though I knew. "He sent it to a journalist," Varin said, voice tight. "That's what they're saying." "They," I said, is always a comforting word. It makes nonsense sound communal. Varin whispered, "Janet Klein is on her way here. She called me. She is furious. She demanded access to donor archives. She said we need damage control." I nodded. Damage control is what guilty people call accountability. Varin's eyes darted. "We don't know it's real." "That's the point," I said. "You don't know." A commotion at the front of the office announced Janet Klein before I saw her. She entered like weather. She did not look at the posters or the staff as if they were furniture. She marched straight toward Varin's office, with a coat that cost more than most people's rent, and a face set in tight anger. "Leo," she snapped, "where is the December archive?" Varin's hands trembled. "Janet, this is not the time." "This is precisely the time," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. She had practiced carrying. "If Grant sent donor records to a journalist, the organization will be destroyed. We must act." I stepped into view. "Good morning." Her eyes flicked to me, and I saw the instant calculation. She knew who I was, not because I was famous, but because in her world you know who works for Nero Wolfe the way you know which door to avoid in a hallway. "Mr. Goodwin," she said coldly, "this is an internal matter." "Grant Alder's skull being cracked is not internal," I said. "It's criminal." Her face tightened. "Grant's death is tragic, but this rumor is dangerous." "It's also interesting," I said. "You arrived quickly." Her eyes narrowed. "I am the board chair. It is my responsibility." "Responsibility is another word people love," I said. "It can mean anything." She ignored that, which was sensible, and focused on Varin. Leo opened the archive cabinet now. Varin looked at me like a man begging for a lifeline. I did not give him one. Wolfe's instruction was to let fear act. "Janet," Varin said, "we cannot remove documents without logging it." Janet's mouth tightened. "Log it however you wish. We are correcting misinformation." I watched her hands. Wolfe had told me long ago to watch hands. A face can smile while hands betray urgency. Janet's gloved fingers were tight at her sides, flexing slightly like a pianist warming up. She was ready to grab paper. She was not ready to discuss morality. "You want donor archives," I said. "You want original documents." She looked at me sharply. "I want to protect the charity." "From what?" I asked. "From transparency." Her eyes flashed. "From irresponsible disclosure." "Grant's vow was irresponsible," I said. "It was performative," she snapped. Then she caught herself, and her lips pressed tight. That slip was delicious. She had called the vow what it was, not brave, not righteous, but performative. And if it was performative, it meant she had known it was theatre and feared it might become real. Before I could press it, the receptionist whispered that a call was coming in for Janet. Janet waved her away impatiently, as if phones were beneath her, and then she turned back to Varin. "Open it," she said. Varin, sweating, moved toward the donor cabinet room. Janet followed him. I followed them, because my job was to observe, and because in an office like that, people do not steal files with police watching unless they feel cornered. Inside the donor cabinet room, Janet stood too close, as if proximity could guarantee control. Varin unlocked the cabinet with his key. Janet's gaze snapped to the drawer labels. Her eyes went directly to restricted gifts. That was not the gaze of a woman concerned with organizational reputation in general. It was the gaze of a woman searching for a specific wound. She reached for the drawer, I said softly, looking for the Klein file. Her hand froze for half a second. Then she turned her head slowly and looked at me with eyes that had suddenly become careful. "I do not know what you mean," she said. "I mean your husband's foundation," I said. "The file that vanished." Her face remained composed, but her fingers tightened on the drawer handle. "This is harassment. This is homicide," I said. "Harassment is when someone calls you too often. Homicide is when someone stops answering, calls forever." Her eyes narrowed. "You are grotesque." "I'm realistic," I said. She released the drawer and turned back to Varin. "I want copies of every December restricted gift agreement." Varin's voice trembled. "Copies, yes," Janet said. "Now if the originals are compromised, we will create a clean archive." A clean archive, another way of saying a sanitized one. I let her proceed because I wanted her to commit to her own panic. Panic produces paper trails if you let it. While Janet hovered, I stepped out and made a call to Lena Pierce. She answered on the second ring, voice tight. "Mr. Goodwin." "Lena," I said, "are you receiving calls from Miles Rourke?" There was a pause. "Yes, he has called me 5 times this morning." "About what?" I asked. "He wants to know what Grant told Wolfe," she said, voice shaking slightly. "He keeps saying we need to coordinate the message." "Coordinate is another one," I said. "Did Grant tell him anything before he died?" "No," she said quickly. Then she hesitated. "He asked Miles for donor files. Miles said he would provide them. Grant didn't trust him." "Did Grant mention sending anything to a journalist?" I asked. "No," she said, "but he did say he had copies. He said he was done letting people hide behind process." "That's enough," I said. "Lena, don't answer Miles anymore. If he insists, tell him you are going to Wolfe's office. That will make him sweat." She inhaled sharply. "That will make him furious." "Good," I said. "Fury is less controlled than politeness." I hung up and stepped back into the corridor. Janet and Varin were still in the cabinet room, and I could hear the scrape of drawers and the whisper of paper. The organization was being protected in real time, which is what criminals call destruction when they want to feel virtuous. I left the office with a purpose now. Wolfe's rumor had done its job with Janet. Now I needed Miles Rourke to show his hand. I did not have to hunt far. Miles Rourke is the kind of man who believes movement proves action, and action proves innocence. He was in the corridor near the break room, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a low, urgent voice. When he saw me, his expression tightened, and he turned slightly away, as if angling his body could hide his guilt. He finished the call quickly, too quickly. "Mr. Goodwin." "Miles," I said. "Busy morning." He forced a smile. "We are managing a crisis." "A crisis created by a vow," I said. He gave a tight laugh. "Grant always liked drama." "Grant is dead," I reminded him. His smile flickered. "Yes, tragic." "You called Lena Pierce repeatedly," I said. His eyes narrowed. "I was trying to help." "Help is another word," I said. "It covers a lot." He stiffened. "What do you want?" I want to know what folder you took at 11:48, I said. His eyes flashed. I told you, program notes. I nodded. Program notes must be valuable. You're still carrying them. His jaw tightened. You are accusing me again. I'm observing you again, I said. Where are you going now? He hesitated. Meeting, off-site. Convenient, I said. He stepped past me, walking quickly, and I followed, because that is what you do when a man insists he is innocent while moving like a thief. He left the building and headed not toward a meeting place, but toward the subway entrance. He kept checking his phone. He walked faster than necessary, shoulders tight, as if he expected someone to grab him. He took the train downtown. I kept my distance, just close enough to see, far enough to avoid being seen, which is easier in New York, because everyone is too busy minding their own business to mind yours. We got off near a row of small storefronts, where business happens quietly, not respectable businesses. Businesses that take cash and do not ask questions. Miles walked into a print shop. The shop was narrow, cluttered with paper, ink. A bell rang when he entered. He spoke briefly to the clerk, then pulled something from under his coat, thin and flexible. He handed it over with care, the way a man hands over something that could ruin him. I stood outside and watched through the glass, because I did not need to hear his words. I needed to see his hands. His hands were careful, his shoulders were tense. He was not copying program notes. Program notes are not handled like contraband. After a few minutes, he stepped aside near the copier. The clerk loaded pages. The machine began to hum. Miles watched the output with a fixed stare. Ledger pages, I thought. I waited until he left, then went inside. The clerk looked up. Help you? I smiled. Maybe. I'm looking for a job that pays in cash and offers terrible health benefits. He frowned. What? I leaned in slightly. The man who just left, dark suit, nervous. What did he copy? The clerk's eyes narrowed. Customer privacy. Customer privacy gets people killed, I said. You want to be involved in homicide. He swallowed, then shook his head. I don't know. I placed a bill on the counter, not large enough to insult Wolfe, large enough to help the clerk remember his obligations. He glanced at it, then at me. Just papers. Old-looking handwritten numbers. Ledger pages, I said. He hesitated, then nodded slightly. Yeah, something like that. What time? I asked. He looked at the register. 10:30. 7. I nodded, and stepped back out. Miles Rourke walked away quickly, folder under his coat now thicker. He had converted something into multiple copies, which meant he intended to distribute it or hide it. Either way, he was working like a man who believed the originals might vanish, which told me Wolfe's rumor had hit the right nerve. I called Cramer from a payphone. Cramer, I said when he answered. Miles Rourke just visited a print shop downtown and copied handwritten pages. Looks like ledger pages. Time was about 10:37. Cramer's voice sharpened. You sure? As sure as I am that you hate paperwork, I said. Send a man to the shop, get the copier record, whatever they have, and compare it to the photocopied ledger pages in the charity office. Cramer grunted. We already got the office copies, labs working them. Tell them where to look, I said. Print shop on Hudson, small place. He paid in cash. Cramer exhaled hard. All right, keep on him. I did, for another half hour, until he ducked into a building and stayed there long enough that following further would require either a warrant or a miracle. I chose neither. I had what Wolfe needed. I returned to the brownstone with the kind of satisfaction you get when you know the net is tightening. Wolfe was in his office. Of course, he listened as I reported the day's drama. The rumor worked, I said. Janet Klein came to the charity office, furious, demanded donor archives. Insisted on damage control. She went straight to restricted files. She ordered copies of December agreements. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Excellent, and Miles Rourke. Miles called Lena Pierce repeatedly, trying to learn what Grant told you, I said. He then visited a print shop and copied handwritten pages, ledger pages, not program notes. I called Cramer. He is sending men. Also, the office photocopies are likely from that same shop. Wolfe sat still, then spoke, voice quiet. Thus, the chain is visible. He listed it with the calm of a man reciting a menu: vow, panic, record cleaning, murder to retrieve the last original proof. I nodded. The vow was the spark. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Number the vow was the match. The spark was already present. The guilt, the vow merely provided oxygen. The telephone rang, I answered, and Cramer's voice came through, brisk now with that tone that says the lab has just handed him something he can slam on a desk. Goodwin, Cramer said. Your print shop lead paid off. Lab matched the toner patterns and paper stock. The photocopied ledger pages at the charity office came from that shop. Same machine, same roller marks, same batch. You were right. I looked at Wolfe. Wolfe's eyes had gone colder, not with anger, but with certainty. Cramer continued, and Rourke paid cash. Clark id him. We got a partial copy count. He made multiple sets. Wolfe spoke loud enough for Cramer to hear. Inspector, you now possess proof of active evidence manipulation by Mr. Rourke. Cramer grunted. Yeah, but I still want the murder part. Wolfe's voice was calm. You will have it. Cramer hung up. Wolfe leaned back slightly. Now we proceed to the gathering. He said it the way a man says dessert. You want Janet, Harold Klein, and Miles Rourke here, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied, for final clarification. I said, Cramer too. Of course, Wolfe said. He will enjoy being present when logic performs. I snorted. Logic performs. That's rich. Wolfe ignored me, also Lena Pierce. Possibly Leo Varin. They are witnesses to the scramble. He paused, eyes narrowing. The promise gained attention it should not because it threatened to become true. I nodded. Grant thought applause meant support. Turns out it meant fear. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Applause is rarely support. It is often coordination. He looked at me. Archie, make the calls. So, I did by late afternoon. Fritz had been instructed to prepare coffee and the kind of small food Wolfe permits. When the house is being used as a courtroom, the lamps were lit. The chairs were aligned. Wolfe sat in his chair with that calm severity he wears when he intends to strip polite people of their polite disguises. Outside, January held the street in its cold hand. Inside, the guilty were on their way to a room where applause meant nothing at all. Chapter 7. Wolfe reads the promise as evidence by the time the guests arrived. Wolfe's office had the air it gets when it is about to be used for something harsher than conversation. Fritz had done the quiet work. The chairs were set with the same exactness he uses when he places plates for dinner. The lamp on Wolfe's desk threw a clean circle of light, making the red leather of the chairs look darker, as if the furniture itself were bracing for testimony. The street outside was January grey, with the kind of cold that turns taxi horns into complaints and makes even respectable people hurry. Wolfe had been upstairs with the orchids at 4, as usual, because Wolfe does not permit murder to interfere with orchid time. But he came down at 5, settled into his chair, and became what he always becomes at an office gathering: the judge, the prosecutor, and the law, all wrapped in one large body that does not move unless it chooses. Cramer arrived first, because Cramer cannot resist the chance to be present when Wolfe does something he will later pretend he could have done himself. He brought 2 plainclothes men who stationed themselves in the hall, and he brought his impatience like a hat, worn and permanent. You got them all coming, he said, eyeing the chairs. I invited them, Wolfe replied. They are not attending a circus, they are attending clarification. Cramer snorted. Clarification? You mean a confession? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. That depends on whether they are wise enough to prefer discomfort now to catastrophe later. Cramer dropped into the red leather chair and glared at me. Where's your proof about that blotter? I lifted my eyebrows. In the trunk of Harold Klein's car. Cramer sat up. "You got it." "I got it," I said. "And it's wrapped in a towel like something you don't want ink to touch." Wolfe's lips pressed together. "We were talking already. You simply did not hear it." The doorbell rang. Fritz answered with his usual calm, and the parade began. Janet Klein came in first because board chairs believe punctuality is a form of authority. She wore a coat that looked expensive without looking loud, and her face was set in the controlled way it had been at the charity office when she demanded damage control. She gave me a glance that implied I was an annoyance she had not been able to cancel. She gave Cramer a glance that implied he was a tool. She gave Wolfe a glance that implied she was not sure whether to fear him or hire him. Behind her came Harold Klein, tall, carefully groomed, with the kind of controlled expression you see on men who think they can negotiate consequences. He had a good jaw, white hair at the temples, and the look of a man who has paid for privacy, often enough to believe it is a right. He carried a briefcase, which made me want to laugh, because in this case a briefcase had become a prop already. Miles Rourke arrived with the practiced smile of a donor coordinator, and the eyes of a man who had spent the day putting out fires with gasoline. He greeted Janet as if they were allies, greeted Harold as if he owed him respect, and looked at Wolfe as if Wolfe were an unexpected audit. Lena Pierce came last, because aides rarely get to choose their entrances. She looked tired, pale, and determined, the way a woman looks when she has had to answer too many questions with too few honest options. She sat where I indicated, hands clasped tightly. Wolfe watched them settle, his gaze moving from face to face with the calm of a man taking inventory. When Fritz closed the office door, the room felt sealed. Not trapped, sealed, like a jar that will not open until Wolfe twists it. Wolfe began without preface. "We are here," he said, "because Grant Alder is dead." Janet Klein lifted her chin. "That is a matter for the police." Cramer made a sound in his throat. Wolfe continued, unbothered. "It is also a matter for truth, and truth has been handled poorly by the people in this room. Therefore, it is now my matter." Miles Rourke opened his mouth, then closed it, choosing caution. Wolfe turned slightly toward Janet. "Mrs. Klein, you are the chair of the charity board." "It is Miss Klein," she snapped. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Your preference is noted. It is irrelevant. You are the chair. You are responsible for governance. You pressured the charity accountant to alter records after the fundraiser." Janet's eyes flashed. "I did no such thing." Wolfe's voice did not rise. "Do not begin with denial. It is tiresome. Mr. Varen's call log shows your call at 11:12 p.m., demanding review of the December ledger that night. Mr. Varen will testify to that if necessary." Janet's mouth tightened. Wolfe shifted his gaze to Miles Rourke. "Mr. Rourke, you are the donor coordinator. You began applauding before Grant Alder finished his vow." Miles gave a short laugh that sounded like it had been rehearsed. "I applaud integrity." Wolfe's eyes were cold. "You applaud timing. Your applause began first because you expected the vow. You were not inspired, you were prepared." Miles stiffened. "That is an absurd interpretation." Wolfe looked at him as if he were a dull child. Inspiration produces hesitation. Preparation produces promptness. You were prompt. Harold Klein cleared his throat. "Mr. Wolfe, this is highly theatrical." Wolfe turned his gaze to Harold. "Mr. Klein, you watched Grant Alder as if you were measuring risk." Harold's eyebrows lifted. "I watched a man making a reckless statement." Wolfe nodded slightly. "Precisely. Not admiration, not surprise, but calculation." I watched Harold's hands. He held them folded on his knee, calm, but the right thumb rubbed lightly against the left knuckle, a small repetitive motion, like a man counting silently. Wolfe leaned forward an inch. "We will begin not with the murder, but with the vow. This year, every donation will be transparent." That is what he said. It was applauded. It was whispered about. It was feared. Janet's voice sharpened. "Feared by who?" "Mr. Rourke, because you manage donors who prefer shadows. Mr. Klein, because your family's money was among those entries, and the conditions attached to it were improper. Harold's jaw tightened. That is defamatory. Cramer leaned forward, enjoying it. Defamatory doesn't apply when it's true. Wolfe ignored Cramer and continued. If Grant Alder had lived, he might have attempted to publish donor names and restricted gifts. Whether he would have succeeded is irrelevant. The vow created the immediate danger. It signaled intent. It forced reaction. He looked at each of them. Reaction leaves evidence. The guilty, when threatened, do not sit calmly. They act, they call, they remove, they copy, they tidy. Those actions are what interest me. Miles Rourke's smile had vanished. He looked like a man who had been asked to donate blood. Wolfe nodded at me. Archie. I opened my notebook. The night of the fundraiser, Janet Klein called the charity accountant at 11:12 p.m. demanding the December ledger be reviewed. The next day, the late December pages of the ledger were replaced with clean photocopies. The originals are missing. Janet's head snapped toward me. That is not proven. It is proven, I said. I saw the ledger. Photocopies do not have ink. They do not have pressure marks. Those pages were swapped. Wolfe said, continue. Miles Rourke was captured on the charity hallway camera, leaving the donor archive corridor at 11:48 p.m. carrying a thin folder tucked under his coat. He claimed he needed program notes. Program notes were not stored in that cabinet. Restricted donor agreements were. Miles's face reddened. I did not take anything improper. I went on because Wolfe likes momentum. Today, Mr. Rourke visited a print shop and copied handwritten pages. Cramer's lab matched the charity ledger photocopies to that print shop's machine. Same toner patterns, same roller marks, same paper stock. The replacements were made there. Miles's jaw tightened hard enough to ache. Wolfe's gaze stayed on him. Thus, you did not merely handle donors. You handled evidence. Miles spoke quickly, trying to regain his footing. We were trying to protect the organization. Grant was about to publish raw information irresponsibly. Donors would have sued. Programs would have collapsed. Wolfe's voice was quiet and cutting. You are not the charity's savior. You are its custodian of secrets. And secrets are often crimes that have learned to wear suits. Janet's eyes flashed. This is outrageous. Wolfe's eyes moved back to her. Outrage is a performance. You are skilled at it. Mr. Rourke is skilled at applause. Mr. Klein is skilled at negotiating. None of that is relevant. We are discussing a homicide. Cramer cleared his throat loudly, impatient with philosophy. Let's talk about the murder. Wolfe raised his brows slightly. We are, but you may present your facts, Inspector. Cramer sat up, pleased to be invited. We got the cufflink found under Grant Alder's desk. Lab matched it to a set owned by Harold Klein. Custom job, jeweler confirmed. Harold's face tightened. I lost 1 month ago. Cramer's eyes narrowed. Sure you did, Cramer continued. We also got the balcony door detail. It was shut, but not latched. Controlled entry or staged exit. Either way, it means someone wanted the scene to suggest an opportunity without leaving damage. No forced entry anywhere else. Harold's voice was tight. Balcony doors get left unlatched all the time. Wolfe's gaze held him. Yes, that is why they are useful. Habit is the murderer's accomplice. Janet spoke sharply. You are implying my husband killed Grant Alder. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. I am implying your husband was present in the study when Grant Alder died, or at least close enough to drop his cufflink beneath the desk. Harold sat very still. That is absurd. Wolfe turned slightly toward him. Then explain it. Harold's lips pressed together. Grant was reckless. He was excited by attention. He had no understanding of the legal consequences of disclosure. I intended to advise caution. Wolfe's eyes narrowed further. You visited him. Harold hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Yes. Janet's head turned sharply toward her husband. Harold. He did not look at her. I went after the fundraiser. Wolfe's voice was calm. At what time? Harold swallowed. After midnight. Lena Pierce made a small sound. Involuntary. Wolfe's eyes flicked to her. Miss Pierce, she spoke quietly. Grant left the hotel around midnight. He said he needed to pick up something in his study. Harold's jaw tightened. Wolfe nodded. After midnight. Caution turns into interference. Harold's face colored. I went to talk. Wolfe's voice sharpened slightly. To persuade, to pressure, to retrieve. Harold snapped. I did not kill him. Wolfe held his gaze. Perhaps not, but your cufflink was found beneath his desk. That is not a moral accusation. It is a physical fact. Janet's voice rose. This is ridiculous. Harold, tell him you were not there. Harold's eyes flicked to her, then away again. I was there. The room tightened. Even Cramer stopped fidgeting. Wolfe watched Harold steadily. You entered the study. You spoke with Grant. Your cufflink fell. You left. Harold's mouth tightened. I spoke with him, we argued. He was stubborn. I left. Wolfe's voice stayed level. Did you strike him? Harold's eyes widened. Number Wolfe nodded slightly, as if accepting the word but not the man. Then who did? Miles Rourke spoke quickly, eager to redirect. This is insane. Harold Klein is not some thug. Wolfe's gaze snapped to him. Thugs are not required. One can kill with respectable hands if one is desperate. Janet straightened, anger and fear colliding. I pressured Leo Varin to tidy records. Yes, I did it to protect donors and the charity. I did not kill Grant. Harold did not kill Grant. This is a disgusting attempt to blame us for what was clearly a personal matter. Wolfe looked at her, almost curious. Personal, the word you use when you wish to stop discussion. Grant Alder's vow made your donor arrangements personal. It threatened to make your private conditions public. Janet's mouth tightened. He had no right. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. He was the public face of a public charity. Rights are not the issue. Exposure is. I watched Janet then. The way her hands clenched on her purse strap, the way her eyes flicked toward Harold and then away, as if she could not decide whether to protect him or blame him. Board chairs like control, but they hate uncontrolled husbands even more. Wolfe leaned back slightly. We have established the panic. We have established the record cleaning. We have established that Mr. Rourke used a print shop to create replacement pages. Miles's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. Wolfe continued. We have established that Mr. Klein visited Grant Alder after midnight and left a cufflink beneath the desk. Now we require the missing component. Janet's eyes narrowed. What component? Wolfe's gaze held hers. The desk blotter. Harold stiffened. Wolfe's voice was quiet. The blotter was removed from the desk. Its absence is significant because a blotter can hold impressions of what was written. Names, amounts, donor conditions, perhaps a list of restricted gifts that were never meant to be acknowledged. The blotter is not decoration. It is a witness. Cramer leaned forward, impatient. We've been looking for it. Wolfe did not look at him. You have been looking without knowing where to look. He turned his gaze fully to Harold Klein. Mr. Klein. Harold's face was tight. Yes. Wolfe's voice remained calm. Where is the blotter? Harold's eyes widened slightly. I don't know. Wolfe's mouth tightened. That is a lie, and it is not even a competent one. Janet snapped. How dare you? Wolfe ignored her. Archie. I stood, went to the side table, and lifted the object that had been waiting there under a cloth. It was not large, but it carried the weight of a case that had been circling paper since the first clap. I pulled back the cloth. It was a leather desk blotter, dark brown, with a faint crease near one corner, as if it had been folded hurriedly. Harold's face went pale. Janet stared, then turned sharply to her husband. Harold. Cramer stood halfway out of his chair. You got it, I said. We found it in Harold Klein's car trunk, wrapped in a towel. Harold's voice cracked. That's impossible. It's possible, I said. It was there. We looked. It was there. Towels are not spontaneous. Harold's jaw worked. You searched my car, Cramer barked. You're lucky we didn't search your teeth. Wolfe raised a hand slightly, and Cramer shut up, which is always worth watching. Wolfe's voice was quiet and deadly. Mr. Klein, you removed the blotter from Grant Alder's desk. That act alone is obstruction. It also suggests motive. You removed it because you feared what it contained. Harold's face was rigid. I removed it because Grant was reckless. He had written down names. My name, Janet's name, donors. It would have destroyed everything. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Everything, a convenient word. It means your reputation, your influence, your money, your marriage, and your comfort. Janet's voice rose, sharp with betrayal. You took it. Harold looked at her then. Finally, his eyes were not tender. They were tired. Yes. Janet's hands clenched. And you did not tell me. Harold's mouth tightened. Because you would have handled it like you handle everything, with committees and calls and pressure. I needed it gone. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. And you visited after midnight to remove it. Harold swallowed. Yes. Wolfe's voice remained calm. And Grant Alder ended dead. Harold's eyes widened. I did not kill him. Wolfe studied him. Perhaps, but you have now admitted presence, interference, and removal of evidence. That narrows the options drastically. Miles, Rourke spoke quickly, voice tight. This is a mistake. Harold is being scapegoated. The real issue is the donor records, and the fact that Grant was going to expose them. Anyone could have killed him. Wolfe's gaze snapped to him. Anion, yet not everyone created replacement ledger pages at your print shop. Miles's face reddened. I told you, I was protecting the charity. Wolfe's eyes were cold. You were protecting yourself. You clapped early because you had planned to manage the vow, not because you admired it. When the vow threatened to become true, you panicked. Panic makes men do foolish things, including murder, Janet snapped. Are you accusing Miles now? Wolfe's voice was quiet. I am not finished. He sat back, and for a moment the only sound was the faint tick of the clock on the wall and the distant rumble of the city outside. Wolfe looked at Lena Pierce. Miss Pierce, did Grant Alder mention the blotter to you? Lena swallowed. He said he wrote down the donors who would fight transparency. He said he wanted proof before he confronted the board. Wolfe nodded. Proof on paper, proof on a blotter. Proof that could not be easily denied. Harold's voice was tight. He was out of control. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. He was attempting control. You objected because it threatened yours. Cramer stood fully now, frustration finally turning into action. All right, Wolfe. We got the blotter in his trunk. That's obstruction at least. We got cufflink presence. We got Rourke's print shop. Who hit Alder? Wolfe's gaze moved from Cramer to the others. He spoke slowly, and in that slowness there was a promise of something sharper. The murderer, Wolfe said, is the person who could not allow the vow to become true, and who had the immediate access, the immediate motive, and the immediate willingness to turn paper panic into blood. Janet's face was stiff. Miles's eyes darted. Harold's jaw clenched. Wolfe continued. Grant Alder was killed in his study with no forced entry, a tidy strike, and a staged suggestion of an unlatched balcony door. The killer came with familiarity, not with tools. The killer removed a phone. The killer left a cufflink, which suggests close proximity and hurried movement beneath the desk. Yet the blotter was later removed by Mr. Klein, indicating a second actor after the death, or an actor who returned. Cramer's eyes narrowed. 2 people. Wolfe nodded slightly. 2 roles, at minimum. 1 role to kill or to cause death. Another role to clean, remove, and tidy. Janet snapped. This is absurd. You are turning governance into conspiracy. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Governance is often conspiracy with stationery. Tonight, it has become more direct. He paused, then spoke with the finality of a door closing. We will conclude this matter now. Inspector Cramer will take possession of the blotter and examine it for impressions. Those impressions will contain names and amounts. Those names will identify who was most threatened, and the threatened person is the one who struck Grant Alder. Cramer grunted. We'll get the lab on it. Wolfe's eyes remained on the group. Until then, you will remain available. If anyone attempts to flee, you will be detained. If anyone attempts to contact a journalist, you will be detained. If anyone attempts to alter the December ledger again, you will be detained. Miles Rourke opened his mouth. Wolfe cut him off. Silence. Your applause is no longer useful. The room held for a moment, tight with fear and anger. I watched them, each one suddenly aware that the vow they had applauded had turned into evidence. That is the trouble with public promises. They do not stay in the ballroom, they follow you home, and somewhere in the leather surface of a blotter, under the pressure of a pen. Grant Alder's last list was waiting to speak. Chapter 8. The promise that confessed the blotter did not speak with a voice. Of course, it spoke the way paper always speaks, by refusing to forget. When Cramer's men took it from Wolfe's office and carried it out like an object that might bite, I watched Harold Klein's face the way Wolfe had taught me to watch faces only, after hands have already betrayed the truth. Harold's hands had been steady, almost too steady. His face was beginning to crack. Wolfe did not chase the crack. He waited for it to widen. It was close to 7, which meant Wolfe had already endured the interruption of his routine, longer than he liked, and he was in the particular mood he gets when his patience is being spent for a purpose. Fritz had quietly removed the coffee tray. The lamps were still lit. The winter dusk outside pressed against the windows like a curious stranger. In the office, Janet Klein sat rigidly, her posture still fighting for control, even as the floor under her life shifted. Miles Rourke sat with his shoulders tight, eyes darting as if searching for an exit that would not insult his pride. Lena Pierce looked tired and pale, but there was something steadier in her now, as if the sight of powerful people unraveling had given her permission to stop pretending. Harold Klein stood. He had been seated earlier, but now he stood because his body had decided sitting was too passive. A man like Harold thinks standing gives him leverage. Cramer returned after a phone call in the hall, and his expression had changed. It was not satisfaction. It was readiness. Lab can pull impressions, Cramer said. They'll have them soon. Wolfe lifted his brows. Soon is a concept I dislike, Cramer snorted. Soon means before midnight. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Acceptable. Harold Klein spoke then, voice tight, the polished tone slipping. This is all unnecessary. My cufflink, a blotter, some ledger pages. You are turning civic governance into a murder plot, because you enjoy drama. Wolfe looked at him with calm contempt. I do not enjoy drama. I enjoy accuracy. Drama is what you have created, by pretending your reputation was more important than a man's life. Harold's jaw flexed. Grant Alder was reckless. Wolfe's gaze stayed on him. Grant Alder was inconvenient. Janet's head snapped. Harold. Harold did not look at her. He was going to publish donor names. He was going to expose restricted gifts. He was going to destroy everything we built. Wolfe's voice was quiet. That word is revealing. It implies partnership. Miles Rourke swallowed visibly. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. Mr. Klein, I will offer you a choice. You may continue pretending this is a misunderstanding, and let Inspector Cramer collect the rest of the facts in the crude fashion he prefers. Or you may speak now and salvage what you can of your dignity. Cramer barked a short laugh. Salvage, that's a good one. Wolfe did not look at him. Speak, Mr. Klein. Harold's face tightened, and for a moment he looked like a man deciding whether to jump or to be pushed. Then his shoulders sagged, almost imperceptibly, as if the weight of his own story had become too heavy to keep lifted. His voice was lower now, stripped of Polish. You want the truth? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Yes. Harold exhaled. Grant's vow threatened to reveal a pattern. Janet flinched. Harold, stop. He looked at her then, and his eyes held a mixture of irritation and resignation. You tried to keep it clean with paperwork. You tried to tidy records. You thought you could contain it. You were wrong. Janet's lips pressed tight. We were protecting the board. Harold's mouth tightened. You were protecting appearances. Wolfe's voice was calm. Proceed. Harold stared at the carpet for a moment, then began, each sentence like a reluctant payment. The restricted gifts in December were not just earmarks. They were attached to favors. My favors, he swallowed. Busyness favors, contracts, introductions, recommendations, things that cannot be written plainly because they are not legal. The charity became a convenient channel for influence. Miles Rourke's face went pale. Harold continued. Grant started digging. He asked for receipts. He asked for archived donation agreements. He asked questions that could not be answered without exposing the mechanism. Janet knew. She panicked. She called the accountant and demanded a review that night. Janet's voice rose. Because we needed to protect donors and programs. Wolfe cut her off. Enough. You will have an opportunity to explain your tampering to the district attorney. Continue, Mr. Klein. Harold swallowed. After the fundraiser, when Grant made that vow, I realized he was not bluffing. He had been cautious before, careful with language. The vow was different. It was public. It was a signal. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. A signal to whom? Harold's mouth tightened. To everyone who had been hiding behind private arrangements, it told us he meant to act. Harold shifted his weight, and I saw his hands tremble slightly for the first time. It was a small tremor, but it was honest. I went to his townhouse, Harold said, after midnight. Janet made a sound that was half anger, half grief. You didn't tell me. Harold ignored her. Grant often forgot to latch the balcony door. He would shut it, assume it was secure, and walk away. Habit. I knew it. I had been there before. Cramer's eyes narrowed. So you used it. Harold nodded slowly. Yes. I intended to steal the blotter. I suspected he had written names on paper on that desk. If I took the blotter, I could remove the impressions, remove his record, make his vow empty again. Miles Rourke whispered, Harold. Harold's eyes flicked to him, cold. Do not pretend you are shocked. You built the system that allowed it. Miles's mouth opened, then closed. Harold continued. Grant was in the study. He was awake. He was not surprised to see me. He swallowed. He said the vow was the beginning. He said the applause was proof that people were afraid. He said he would publish everything. Wolfe's voice was quiet, and you objected. Harold's jaw tightened. I told him he would ruin the charity. He told me the charity was already being ruined by people like me. Janet's shoulders shook once, as if the sentence had hit her harder than the murder. Harold's voice grew strained. He reached for the phone. There was a small silence then. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. Harold continued. I grabbed his arm. He pulled away. He was stronger than I expected. He said he would call the police. He said he would call a journalist. He said he would make it public tonight. Wolfe's eyes narrowed further. And you struck him. Harold's face contorted briefly. Yes. Cramer shifted forward, like a dog hearing the final command. Harold's voice was low. A bookend. Heavy, on the desk. I struck him once. He fell back in the chair. It was quick. Janet's eyes closed. Lena Pierce covered her mouth with one hand, and tears slid down her face. Silently, Harold's voice hardened, as if harshness could protect him from what he was saying. I did not intend to kill him. I intended to take the blotter and leave. But when he fell, I knew the only way to survive was silence. Wolfe's expression did not change. Then you staged the room. Harold nodded. I straightened the chair. I wiped the bookend. I kept it calm. I took his phone. Cramer barked. To delay discovery. Harold's eyes flicked to him. Yes. Wolfe's voice stayed level. And the cufflink. Harold swallowed. It must have fallen when I bent down. I did not notice. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You noticed enough to take the blotter later. Harold flinched. I took it then. I wrapped it in a towel in the car. Janet's voice was tight with fury and disbelief. You killed him, and you thought you could still come home and pretend. Harold's jaw clenched. I thought I could contain it. Wolfe's eyes held him. Containment is what guilty men always imagine. They imagine truth can be stored like a file. Miles Rourke found his voice then, fast and pleading. This is not only Harold. The vow created chaos. People panicked. I did what I could to keep the organization from imploding. Wolfe's gaze moved to him by replacing ledger pages. Miles's face reddened. I replaced them to protect donors, to protect programs, to keep staff focused on normal paperwork. If the vow had faded into January noise, none of this would have become public. Wolfe's voice was cold. The vow did not fade because it was attached to a corpse. Cramer stood, his chair scraping. All right, that's enough. He nodded to the two men in the hall. They entered. Harold Klein did not resist. He looked as if resistance would be pointless and undignified, and he still cared about dignity even with blood on his hands. Janet rose too, sharp and furious. But her fury was now laced with fear. Cramer turned to her. You're not walking out clean either, he said, tampering with records, ordering the ledger tidied, pressuring the accountant. We'll sort it out. Janet's eyes flashed. I was protecting the charity. Cramer snorted. You were protecting yourselves. Miles stood, hands trembling. I didn't kill anyone. Cramer looked at him. Number, you just tried to bury the truth under photocopies. That's fraud and obstruction. You'll talk downtown. Lena Pierce sat very still, tears on her cheeks as if she had been drained of everything but endurance. When the door closed behind the police and Harold Klein, the office felt suddenly larger and emptier. Wolfe sat in his chair, motionless, his face calm, as if he had watched a demonstration of arithmetic, not a confession of murder. He looked at me. Archie. Yes. Wolfe's voice was quiet. A promise made too early is often rehearsed. Rehearsal leaves witnesses. Applause is one of them. I nodded slowly. And the whisper. Yes, Wolfe said. Fear speaks in whispers. Guilt speaks in motion. I thought of the ballroom, the clapping hands starting too soon. The tight whisper from Janet to Grant. Harold watching like a man measuring risk. All of it had been evidence before anyone died. The public edges had cut inward. Cramer returned, briefly, hat in hand, face still flushed. Wolfe, good work. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Do not flatter me, Inspector. It is unbecoming. Cramer snorted, almost smiling. You don't miss much, do you? After Cramer left, Fritz appeared with the quiet competence that always steadies the house after chaos. He asked Wolfe if he wished to eat. Wolfe said yes, because Wolfe always says yes to dinner unless the world is ending. I went to the front window and looked out at the street. The snow had been trampled into grey ridges by people hurrying to their own concerns. The city did not pause for vows or corpses. It just kept moving, applauding itself for surviving another winter. The case had begun with applause and ended with handcuffs. The vow had not predicted the crime. It had provoked it. It had forced the guilty to move too fast, to tidy too hard, to copy too much, to leave a cufflink under a desk and a blotter in a trunk. Wolfe was right. The vow did not just summon attention, it summoned confession, and I was left with the same thought that always arrives at the end of a Wolfe case. As reliable as Fritz's coffee, the most dangerous thing you can do in a room full of guilty people is promise to tell the truth out loud.